Napoleon Bonaparte. Just say the name and an image pops into your head, right? But what if that whole picture, the one we all know from history books and those epic paintings, is just, well, part of the story? That's what we're going to do here. We're going to peel back all those layers of myth and try to find the real person underneath. And trust me, he's a lot more complex and honestly a lot more surprising than you think.
Yeah, when you think of Napoleon, this is probably what you see. The brilliant general, the emperor who literally redrew the map of Europe. He's this larger-than-life, almost mythical figure. I mean, his story is just insane. A total meteoric rise from this passionate Corsican nationalist to the absolute ruler of France.
But what if the most famous things you think you know about him aren't exactly right? What if the legend is actually hiding a reality that's way more interesting and way more human?
Okay, so to really get Napoleon, you have to start with the source of his power. And no, it wasn't just his armies. It was his mind. And that mind was fueled by a work ethic that was, frankly, just relentless.
I mean, he wasn't kidding. He really, truly lived by those words. His devotion to work was obsessive. He saw every single moment as a chance to push his projects forward, whether that was, running a war or completely overhauling the French government.
16 hours a day. That's what he claimed he worked. Every single day. Think about that. He didn't really have hobbies like you and I do. His work was his hobby. It was his life. His energy was just legendary, and you better believe he expected everyone around him to keep up.
So you gotta ask, how did one person manage all that? Well, he had this famous way of describing his mind. He said it was like a cupboard with different drawers. When he needed to work on something, he just opened that specific drawer. And when he was done, he'd close it, shut, and it wouldn't get mixed up with the next thing. This gave him this incredible laser-like focus. He'd just devour these monthly reports, memorizing every little detail about his armies and navies, probably better than the people who wrote the reports. And the guy never stopped. His carriage was basically a mobile office, kitted out with a desk and lights so he could keep working even while he was traveling.
All right, so we've got the workaholic, the military genius, check. But what about the person behind that public mask? Well, as we're about to see, he was a much stranger, more private guy than you'd think, with some really surprising habits. Get this, the guy who commanded these massive armies was a bit of a romantic. Seriously. At 26 years old, he wrote this short, kind of sappy romance novel. Now look, no one's going to say it's a literary masterpiece, but it shows this softer side to him, a side that totally clashes with that image of the ruthless conqueror we all have.
And oh, the weirdness doesn't stop there. Apparently, he used to put on disguises, walk around Paris, and just ask regular people what they really thought about him, about their emperor. And he was famously completely tone-deaf, but he would hum or sing badly whenever he got agitated. And then there's the really dark one. He carried a vial of poison on a cord around his neck, just in case he was captured. He actually tried to use it in 1814, but it had gotten old and lost its potency, so it just made him super sick.
So, yeah, he had some strange habits, but that's not the only reason there's so much misinformation out there about him. His whole life is just surrounded by these myths that refuse to die. So you know what? It's time for a little fact-checking. All right, let's start with the big one, the one everyone knows. Was Napoleon short? I mean, the whole Napoleon complex is named after the guy. So was he really this tiny tyrant everyone pictures?
The answer? A big, fat no. He wasn't short at all. Okay, here's the deal. When he died, he was measured at 5 feet 2 inches, but that was in old French inches, which were longer than ours. When you do the math and convert it to modern units, he was about 5 foot 6.5. For a Frenchman back in the 19th century, that was perfectly average. The whole myth probably got started because of British propaganda and just simple confusion over the measurements.
Okay, next myth. What about the story that this great, world-conquering general was terrified of cats? It's a super popular rumor, but is there any truth to it?
So this one is a classic case of mistaken identity, and it's a perfect example of how these historical myths get going. There is zero, and I mean zero evidence that Napoleon Bonaparte was afraid of cats. In fact, his wife, Josephine, loved them. The real story is that it was his nephew, Napoleon III, who had a crazy fear of cats. Like, so bad he would supposedly jump up on the furniture to get away from one.
Okay, so we've busted a couple of myths. But now let's turn to something a little more serious. Because for all that mental energy he had, Napoleon's body was basically in a state of constant rebellion. He was plagued by these really profound, painful health problems that actually had a direct impact on history.
Yeah, this isn't just a boring medical chart. This is a list of things that literally changed history. The most famous one, a nasty attack of hemorrhoids that was so painful he couldn't even ride his horse on the morning of the Battle of Waterloo. He had to delay the start of the whole thing. He also suffered from bladder stones that caused him agonizing pain right before another huge battle. He had old battle wounds that just never fully healed. And on top of all that, there was the stomach cancer, which ran in his family and was the thing that finally got him.
His last few years are really just a story of his body failing him. That delay at Waterloo in 1815, that was a huge moment. Then by 1819, when he was in exile in St. Helena, doctors were already noting signs of a really serious illness. And in 1821, he was gone. He was only 51. The body that had carried him all across Europe just gave out. And you can't really blame him for this cynical take on doctors. I mean, given that he was constantly suffering and the medical treatments back then were just brutal and mostly useless, we're talking things that probably made him feel even worse, it's no surprise he wasn't a big fan of the medical profession. So, let's take a step back. We've got the workaholic, the myth, the man in constant pain. How do you make sense of all these different pieces? Well, to do that, you have to look at his legacy, which is just as complicated and full of contradictions as he was. On the one hand, you've got this visionary lawmaker creating systems that would last for centuries. And on the other hand, you have the general whose campaigns led to these incredible cultural discoveries, but also a whole lot of looting. It's this perfect picture of the two sides of his legacy.
And his influence is absolutely still with us today. You've got the Napoleonic Code, which was this deliberate act of genius. It completely reformed French law and became the blueprint for legal systems all over the world. But then you have the accidental impacts. His soldiers just stumbled upon the Rosetta Stone in Egypt back in 1799. And that one find, that single rock, unlocked the secrets of hieroglyphs and completely changed how we understand ancient history. Wild, right?
So who was the real Napoleon? The tireless micromanager? The tone-deaf romantic? The guy in constant pain whose health problems might have changed the course of a battle? The thing is, he was all of them. The real Napoleon isn't just that epic figure on a horse. He's the deeply complex, contradictory, and yeah, brilliant human who is all of these things at the same time. And maybe that's a story that's even more legendary.